One of the tragedies of life is that men motivate things. James Bond is a motivator. He goes to point A, and he knows why he's going to point A. And if he meets a girl on the way, you know, it is to be used for the situation, his mission. It's very difficult to write a good Bond lady's part. It really is very difficult because they're there as part of the scenery.
You don't show your scars. You were born to risk it all. But beneath your marble surface, your cracks begin to split. Fractures fill. Does it haunt you still? You and your shiny toys. You light it up. Beat the drum, bring the noise. You always have the answer, and you do it with a bang. But you know you can't let go, because she's on your mind, and it keeps you up at night. Oh, you try to but she still holds your power. You may be the man of the hour, but not without her.
Ian Fleming, creator of James Bond, first appeared on the bookstands in 1953 with the first of Bond's adventures, Casino Royale. The adventures of Bond have already been turned into immensely popular movies, and a third film is in production.
James Bond blossomed into something incredible that perhaps Ian Fleming may not have realized it would become when he was writing them.
It's something that's gone through the generations.
Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
007. Licensed to kill whom he pleases, where he pleases, when he pleases.
It's very old-fashioned. It's him being a gentleman.
I think a lot of people just want the escape and the entertainment value of it.
If you don't give your man 007, I will.
He became a product of his time, and once I started to understand that, I was able to look at all the Bonds in a different light.
We do have the swinging 60s, sexual freedom. We also have the Playboy era.
Bunny is an American creation. She's a cross between a hostess showgirl and a barmaid waitress, well versed in the art of charming the cash customers in a string of plush international clubs. Oh yes, view her as you will, a bunny can be most appealing, which for charity work is just the right tack.
The Bond films not only react to what is happening in popular culture, but also kind of feed into it and offer one particular interpretation of it.
Here she is. She is single and fun-loving.
We had to have kind of these ideal women.
The women of the 1960s, because the way that the novels are adapted, there's a little bit more flexibility and fluidity with the archetype of the Bond girl.
There's sort of the sacrificial lamb character, there's the female villain character, and there's the main Bond girl character who winds up surviving throughout the film. I see those women from the earlier films as very much stereotyped as what an ideal woman supposedly is supposed to be.
I really didn't know what they expect me to be because they made such a big fuss, and I was scared I wouldn't be able to deliver or to come up to their expectation of me.
At first they used to try to catch me, but they couldn't. Now I don't think they bother anymore.
Well, they will this time.
People think, oh, well, that's what I represent to the producer or to the director or to the part in the film. They think, oh, well, she's right for that because they see me in that way.
You're going to have a Bond girl that is going to be always a damsel in distress.
She exists in a James Bond male-centric world.
You cannot have a Bond movie without beautiful women. You sealed the deal. You sealed the deal. Come on.
Is it a sexist term? Yes. Are we kind of stuck with it? Yes.
How about Bond gal? When I was doing For Your Eyes Only, the Bond girls were the women in the background, like say, you know, the 20 bikini-clad gals. Those were always the Bond girls.
Women that depended on Bond, at least to some degree.
He relies on these women for assistance. But of course, this is James Bond's universe, so he gets the glory and he gets to move on.
My dear girl, don't flatter yourself. What I did this evening was for king and country. You don't think it gave me any pleasure, do you?
But of course, I forgot your ego, Mr. Bond. James Bond, who only has to make love to a woman and she starts to hear heavenly choir singing. She repents and immediately returns to the side of right and virtue. But not this one.
Ian Fleming wrote about enticing women who were either going to get rid of James Bond or seduce him and, you know, cause more trouble, and that was the formula.
All Bond women had pretty much been disregarded, that there's nothing of value that these women are bringing to the screen. I disagree, and I think based on the popularity of the franchise, we need to look to see if there is value instead of just assuming from the outset that it's not there.
We've opened up the Bond woman a whole lot more than the Bond male.
They were never the leads, but it's kind of evolved that now Bond girl is the leads.
I suspect that Bond was the first franchise really to make the women at least half the story.
The casting of Judi Dench as M was a reflection of that, by having a woman be the head of MI6.
Would you care for a drink?
Thank you. Your predecessor kept some cognac in the top.
I prefer bourbon. Ice?
Yes.
You don't like me, Bond. You don't like my methods. You think I'm an accountant. A bean counter, more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
The thought had occurred to me.
Good. Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War. Whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you.
Point taken.
Not quite, 007. If you think for one moment I don't have the balls to send a man out to die, your instincts are dead wrong.
She is the head of the organization. She is emotionally detached, and it really shows the extent to which she was a consummate professional throughout.
When we had Louise Maxwell in the role as Moneypenny, it was kind of a flirtatious. She was in the role for a very long time. There was that banter.
She's a little bit of entertainment, but ultimately she's an essential function of the British government.
James Bond could not be successful in his mission without her.
She helps Bond become grounded.
What would I ever do without you?
As far as I can remember, James, you've never had me.
Hope springs eternal.
You know, this sort of behavior could qualify as sexual harassment.
Really? What's the penalty for that?
Someday you have to make good on your innuendos.
After you, Moneypenny.
No, I insist. You first.
Even our concept of heroism, you don't always have to be engaged in action to be heroic.
But when we got the reboot with Naomi Harris, we actually got a nice backstory of Moneypenny that we didn't have before. When she's out in the field, it isn't kind of a head scratcher like, well, why is she not behind the desk anymore? Why is she out in the field? Why is she interacting with that action? Because she was trained to do that. And I think that really allowed us to connect with her, and we get to see that she has her own life.
Those little subtleties demonstrate that the franchise has moved in such a way to represent women in a much better light than in the 1960s and early 1970s.
My agent got a call saying, would you be interested in doing a Bond? I said, well, I want to talk to you about it. The story will be, there'll be a woman villain, there'll be a woman hero, and all this kind of stuff.
They play a lot on this notion that it's a post-feminist notion that women can be sexual, but they can't be judged for their sexuality. And so you see Bond not only sexually interacting with women, but women using their sexuality for their own gain, and that's what the female villains do.
I needed someone who was Bond's equal, in a sense, in her way to manipulate people and whatever. So I think if you look at the Bonds, you know, they all bring something.
With Elektra King, you get this very complex figure. She possesses all of the attributes, at least you think, of the typical Bond girl, and yet she's the primary villain.
So they were smart enough to keep up with the times. You know, they didn't get left behind to become antiquated.
She's the one who is in charge of all of the men and running things behind the scenes. And to have the first female arch villain in a film in 1999 was really important.
The drama and all the excitements surrounds a woman, whether it's sexual or business or whatever. You know, that women were absolutely central.
His world is populated by women. He's surrounded by women, and these women help us to understand him as a character. And I really wanted to focus in on them and their diversity. You know, if you look at somebody like Jinx, her representation is different than white Bond girls. She's presented as being hypersexualized. Her first encounter with Bond, yes, it is a sex scene, because typically he waits and has to seduce them, and that's fine. But that scene is probably the most steamiest, most graphic sex scene that we have. There's sweat everywhere. They're sort of kind of moving around on each other. And that level of sexuality, that sort of animalistic sexuality, is not represented through white women. And so then the question is, why is that being represented through Halle Berry? I like these representations. They're different. They're breaking sort of the Bond girl mold. You look at someone like Michelle Yeoh in Tomorrow Never Dies. I was just taken back by her performance, that she brought in her own stunt team, that she is dynamic on screen, whereas Pierce Brosnan's Bond simply just punches a guy. What I find interesting about that film is she's only there for about half the film. It's as if having Michelle Yeoh for a much longer period in the film maybe would have taken our attention away, that it was a Bond film and not Michelle Yeoh's Wei Lin film. But we do see a strengthening of women in heroic roles. I consider them to be action hero Bond girls. They really are truly co-heroes.
When you have a stronger female, you can have a stronger, more flawed James Bond. And I think that makes the journey more interesting. I think it also allows Bond to be weak and allows them to have an opportunity to save him and on the occasions that they can do so. It also leaves the door open where, because of their skill sets and because of their occupations and their intelligence and their ingenuity, their motivations and so forth, they're able to bring more to the table. I think that there was a lot wrapped up in his persona as that hero, that he had to not have a vulnerability.
The way that we've viewed power historically has been through masculinity and through men, and specifically in our filmic representations in Western culture through white men.
What does the man think of James Bond? How does he measure himself? How does he perceive himself? There's an unrealistic expectation if men look to Bond to be that ideal. I don't want to see men get left behind and feel that they're in a crisis and that they don't have, role models that they can identify with that are positive for them as well. I could say that the male identity is still in a crisis in this franchise.
I think young men are able to look at these movies a little bit more maturely, and that's I think that is the education of where we are now.
James Bond is a great lens, especially for a male audience. Feminism is enabling and empowering a woman to make a choice of how she wants to live her life. And if she wants to assume a certain role, then she should have that opportunity to do it, just like a man should have the opportunity to choose what role he wants to fulfill in life.
We can be who we want to be, not who we're told to be. Like, that's my image of feminism. That's not what everybody's image of feminism is, but I think there's many different articulations of it.
Women who lived in the 60s and the 70s understood the progression. They were living it. They knew what came before, and they knew what lied ahead in terms of achievements and what opportunities were now open to them.
This is still the formula, so you have to hold on to that, but you can't put down a James Bond movie because it doesn't fit what people are thinking about feminism today.
So the fact that James Bond exists doesn't mean that James Bond contributes to toxic masculinity, at least in my opinion. Because there are a lot of awful things that exist that people will watch or people will experience and witness, and it has absolutely no impact on them whatsoever. And then there are others who would experience or watch the same thing and really have a reaction and really have it influence them. So I don't think James Bond is a problem unless people allow it to, individual people allow it to become a problem for them.
These are films that are being screened by millions and millions of people around the world. I think it's estimated that 1/4 of the world's population have seen a Bond film. That's the type of reach that most film franchises don't have, even when we're talking about big blockbuster franchises today.
I think the films are going to keep a lot of elements of that formula and just apply them in modern contexts.
The franchise is for everyone. The focus is a demographic that's men and women. So let's talk about it.
I can connect with Bond's sense of adventure and excitement. I can, want to fight for moral good and for, the safety and security of my country. I can be connected with that. I can look at various women and kind of be amazed. I can like the women who are part of Octopussy and want to, be better equipped to defend myself physically and to see, wow, that's what it looks like on screen. That's amazing. I think I can do that as well. I don't have to buy into every single aspect of what I see on screen. That means it's the way that we read. And there's many different, Stuart Hall has talked about, what direction are we actually going to go in with these films? It's not just about casting Daniel Craig, which has been a long, never-ending cycle of stories, but what do we do with him now?
So I think it would be very interesting to see how the whole James Bond framework and the James Bond formula could be applied or extended in different avenues.
We are not trying to prove anything, not trying to show how women should behave or men should behave.
We sit here and we critique James Bond for presenting it in this way, but we code these other films as this is what women want, this is what women desire, this is what women need. And in both cases, it's largely men who are shaping these broader narratives about women.
I still think that Bond movies have a positive influence on the world.
We can't look at a Bond film and say, it's this, and just say, no, I'm not going to look at it anymore because, or label it so simply as being this or this.
And I love Bond, and I love the action and the adventure, and I wish that I could go on those adventures, and he can do things that I simply can't do, right? He has freedoms as a man to sleep with who he wants without judgment. He can go to different places and spaces, cross borders, and not be in danger, not have to worry about being assaulted physically or sexually. And I'm not going to be made to feel guilty for finding spaces for myself to read and gain pleasure from it.
So it is politically charged, it is socially charged. So we have to be able to mediate those things as well, to get to a point where you have characters that are not tearing each other down, or that one has to be torn down so the other one can move forward.
It doesn't have to be this binary that we have in society, that it has to be one thing or another. It's black or it's white, it's Democrat or it's Republican, it's this or it's that.
And that's where that gray area is very important.
Most of the images in a black and white photo are shades of gray, and most people fall somewhere in between when we actually look at how people think, feel, and identify.
As women, we have an opportunity to identify more with them than we have in the past.
I don't think that you would have an Ocean's 8 type film if you didn't have the Bond girl and the Bond girl character.
It's nice to look back, but I think that it's even better to look forward.
So I'm really interested to see, even just conceptually, where we're going to be moving, because cinematically things have changed as well.
I'm proud of being a part of the James Bond franchise.
We need more women on all film projects at every single level, from script writing to direction to cinematography. We need to have more women around and on set giving their input.
It's like putting together a puzzle, and you know, the 1,000-piece puzzle, and sometimes you open the box and you're missing one piece. These movies would not fly without these Bond women.